Tonight, new measures. The U.S. revoking Russia's trade status, paving the way for even more sanctions as Russia steps up a relentless barrage on major Ukrainian cities. The hospital attack in Mariupol, now called a war crime. Plus, fighting for their lives. The civilian defense force of Ukrainian women and men, young and old. And a new axis of evil.
I think Putin went to China in order to get Xi's blessing for the invasion.
Russia and China team up to undermine the U.S. All this and more on Faith Nation. The U.S. set to unleash additional sanctions on Russia amid intense fighting and fierce Russian strikes on major Ukrainian cities. Welcome to Faith Nation, everyone. I'm Wendy Griffith. The U.S. is dealing a new economic blow to Moscow. President Biden calling on Congress to join our European allies in suspending normal trade relations and removing Russia's most favored nation status, which has thus far exempt them from tariffs. It's the latest response to President Vladimir Putin's unprovoked invasion of Ukraine, and it comes as his forces continue their advance toward the capital of Kyiv. Our CBN News national security correspondent Caitlin Burke has tonight's top story. Caitlin.
Wendy, today's announcement focuses on the latest round of economic measures designed to pressure and hold Russia accountable for its actions in Ukraine. Biden also made clear there's more where this came from if Putin doesn't begin to back down.
As Putin continues his merciless assault, the United States and our allies and partners continue to work in lockstep to ramp up the economic pressures on Putin and to further isolate Russia on the global stage.
The nations supporting these latest sanctions make up half of the global economy. And while Putin continues to brush off their effects, his citizens are feeling the brunt.
The totality of our sanctions and export controls is crushing the Russian economy.
Meanwhile, in Ukraine, Russian forces advance closer to Kyiv. U.S. officials saying they're now only about 9 miles out, and that 40-mile convoy, stalled for a week, is now on the move again. UK defense officials predicting it will join the offensive on Ukraine's capital. Attacks on civilians also continue to increase. Vice President Kamala Harris strongly condemning the recent bombing of a maternity hospital in Mariupol.
We are clear that any intentional attack or targeting of civilians is a war crime. Period.
The World Health Organization has verified 29 attacks on Ukrainian healthcare facilities, workers, and ambulances. Meanwhile, the Biden administration warning that as bad as things are, they could get worse. Officials concerned that Russia may use false claims about the United States and Ukraine developing chemical weapons as an excuse to deploy them in an attack.
It is Russia that has long maintained a biological weapon program in violation of international law. It is Russia that has a well-documented history of using chemical weapons. It is Russia who is the aggressor.
As for the economic measures announced today, in order to remove Russia's most favored nation trade status, Congress must act. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi already signaling that the legislation will have support and planning a vote for next week. Wendy?
Thank you so much, Caitlin. Well, here with us now is Andrew Moroz. He's a Ukrainian-American pastor at Gospel Community Church in Lynchburg, Virginia. Pastor, thanks so much for joining us tonight on Faith Nation.
Thank you so much for having me.
Pastor, you've been deeply impacted by the crisis and still have family and friends in Ukraine. Have they been able to reach safety?
Yeah, so some of my family members have escaped to Poland and they're waiting as refugees there. Others have escaped to smaller communities and smaller villages where the conflict is not as intense. So far, everybody is okay, but many of them are still in harm's way.
More than 2 million people, as you know, have fled Ukraine. How are churches and organizations in the region helping these refugees?
Well, churches and ministries have had to be totally flexible and change the way that they've been operating. And every single day I'm communicating with friends and ministry associates about the ways that they're transporting refugees out of danger zones to safe borders, picking up supplies at the safe borders, bringing them back to help resupply those who need it. So a lot of people are involved in refugee efforts right now on the border, helping resettle people or helping them bring them and come back. So a lot of heroes, a lot of brave men and women who love Jesus.
You were born in Kyiv when it was still part of the Soviet Union, so you got to see that transformation. What is it like for you now, looking and watching this on TV?
You know, it truly is heartbreaking. We were beginning to see the country of Ukraine embrace democracy and capitalism and freedom. And they were not always practicing that perfectly, but there was a lot of opportunity. And so looking forward with this unknown, there's a lot of fear about what will happen to that freedom and what will happen to those opportunities. And so we're afraid to go back in time. We don't want to go back in time. We want to go forward. And so this is really a fight against good and evil, against capitalism and freedom, against religious freedom. And we're fearful of what may be.
Yeah, and the church was flourishing there right after the Soviet Union fell apart. What is your worst fear now for the church in Ukraine?
Well, my worst fear is also an opportunity, and the worst fear is the persecution that may come, the oppression that may come, the limitations that may come. Historically, we also know that God uses oppression and persecution in order to help expand his church and stretch his church and apply the gospel in ways that people don't experience when there isn't conflict and oppression. So greatest fear can also be one of the greatest opportunities.
And Pastor Andrew, what is your prayer right now as you're watching people in Ukraine, many of them still your family members, and watching them put their faith into practice during this crisis? What is your prayer?
We're praying for safety. We are praying for peace. We are praying for Christ to be magnified and glorified in every dark space and every dark place. We're praying for the conflict to end. We want this thing to end, and we believe God can do that.
Pastor Andrew Moroz in Lynchburg, Virginia. God bless you, and we pray everybody gets out safe and alive. God bless you.
Thank you. God bless you, too.
Well, CBN's Operation Blessing is on the ground in Ukraine, providing critical relief to refugees. To partner with Operation Blessing, you can simply text OB Crisis. That's OB Crisis to 71-777. President Biden is set to sign a massive $1.5 trillion bill to avert a government shutdown and provide billions of dollars in new aid to Ukraine. The Senate, in a bipartisan effort last night, voting 68-31 to pass the omnibus spending package to fund the government through September. The giant spending package includes the Hyde Amendment restricting taxpayer funding for abortion. The bill also includes $13.6 billion in aid to Ukraine and funding for a slew of priorities on both sides of the aisle. Well, joining us now is Julia Manchester, political reporter with The Hill. Julia, thanks for coming on today. Good to see you.
Thank you for having me. Good to see you.
Well, Democrats in the House agreed to strip the bill of new COVID relief funds as a concession to Republicans. Republicans and some Democrats also insistent on keeping the Hyde Amendment there. Did the billions in Ukraine aid make a difference in terms of bipartisanship here?
You know, I think it did a little bit. Obviously, there were some holdouts on that, people who voted present and such because they were unhappy with other parts of the bill. But we are really seeing overall how Ukraine and the attitudes towards Ukraine are really, in a way, bringing the country together. We are seeing poll after poll that shows roughly 70% of Americans, Republicans, Democrats, and independents, say they are willing to pay higher gas prices at this moment if it means sanctioning Russia. Now, it's interesting because we see that there is this wide support to sanction and really hit back at Russia, specifically the Kremlin and Vladimir Putin. But at the same time, we still see that there is much divide in the country. In fact, we've seen that President Biden's approval ratings are still at 42%. So Ukraine has done some to, I think the situation has caused some bipartisanship here here in the United States, but there's still a lot of divide, especially if you look at really the meat of that legislation.
Yeah, for sure. And Congress still has to act in order to remove Russia's most favored nation's trade status. House Speaker Pelosi is already planning a vote next week. Is this sure to pass?
You know, I think it definitely does stand a very good chance of passing. You know, like I said, there is bipartisan support, not only among lawmakers on Capitol Hill, but really across the country to very much isolate Russia. And we're not only seeing the support stemming from the United States, but really the West overall. I think the economic isolation of Russia has been extremely unprecedented. We've seen a lot of Western nations go ahead and cut those ties with Russia, despite it being a relatively substantial economy. I mean, you know, the U.S. cutting ties with Russia won't make that much of a major difference in terms of our economy, since we're such a bigger economy. But I think there is a bipartisan appetite for it.
And Julia, the giant omnibus government spending package includes a lot of pork, 4,000 earmarks, special projects for lawmakers spanning more than 300 pages. You know, is this the real reason the bill passed without a lot of resistance, because there's a lot of pork?
You know, it's very possible. We know that there's oftentimes internal bickering between Republicans and Democrats wanting to get something, you know, what they want included in the bill. And a lot of what they want includes those special projects. And it's a bit of a power play. So, you know, it does definitely have to do with the process.
Well, switching gears here to Texas. Today, the state Supreme Court ruling against providers in a lawsuit over the state's ban on abortion after 6 weeks. The ruling focused on a procedural issue in the ban, not whether the law is constitutional. So where does this go from here?
Well, I think you are definitely going to see challenges from the abortion rights community against this. And, you know, we will likely see this appealed. But I think overall, this fits into the broader narrative in the country and the broader debate in the country over the future of Roe v. Wade and the future of abortion rights in the country. So I think we're going to continue to see debate, but I don't think this is heavily surprising in Texas. We know that Texas is heavily Republican. We know that its leadership is heavily Republican, very conservative. So this seems to have really gone along with what they were pushing for.
All right, Julia, thanks so much. We always appreciate your insights.
Thank you.
As Russia lays siege to Ukraine, it's not just the military fighting back. Coming up, ordinary Ukrainians, men and women, taking up arms to defend their homeland. Welcome back to Faith Nation. Young and old, women and men, the people of Ukraine are putting their lives on the line to defend their nation. As CBN senior international correspondent George Thomas shows us, even though they lack military experience and training, they're taking up arms and preparing for the fight.
24-year-old Taras Zarvansky has taken this weapons training class before, but isn't comfortable with the AK-47 just yet.
To be honest, the gun still feels a little heavy.
Zarvansky, whose background is in marketing, tells CBN News he decided to join Ukraine's civil defense force after watching videos of Russian troops targeting innocent civilians.
I completely changed my attitude after they started bombing Kharkiv. Now I'm ready to kill them.
Wednesday, Zarvansky and 13 others, all from different walks of life, watched and listened as a Ukrainian army instructor showed them how to assemble and disassemble, charge and aim guns. 49-year-old Vadim builds homes for a living. Russian troops destroyed his home north of Kyiv last week during an attack on his city of Bucha.
I've been thinking about learning how to use a weapon since the war started in 2014, because our enemy is really insidious and Putin will not stop until we beat him.
Thousands of civilians like Vadim have been getting training on weapons and other military skills to defend their country against Russian invaders.
I made a decision for myself that it is necessary to teach as many people as possible. Not to kill, but how to survive in the best way possible in the fight.
Many women, like Maria Opaka, want to join the fight.
When you see all of this, you understand that we have to do everything now to protect ourselves and our territory as much as you can.
Meanwhile, many living abroad are coming back home.
The reports are that some 140,000 Ukrainians who used to live outside of the country have returned since Russia's invasion. And in fact, by the way, the Ukrainian embassy in Washington, D.C. is reporting that some 3,000 Americans have also signed up to fight the Russians.
Ukraine's government started a website last week encouraging foreign volunteers to join the so-called International Legion to fight Russian forces. President Zelensky claimed thousands of fighters from 52 countries were already on their way.
The first of 16,000 are coming to defend the liberty and life of us and of everyone. I'm sure it will be successful.
Among them, this foreign fighter named Static, who was filmed instructing volunteers on use of an RPG launcher.
You're fighting for democracy because democracy is precious and one man shouldn't decide that another country shouldn't have it.
Not to be outdone, Russia is also reportedly recruiting foreign fighters. According to the Wall Street Journal, Syrian mercenaries are being deployed to Ukraine, along with fighters from Chechnya. George Thomas, CBN News, Lviv, Ukraine.
Incredible. When we come back, a new axis of evil, why the war in Ukraine could escalate into a global power struggle. The war on Ukraine could open the door to greater global conflict. A new axis of evil led by Russia and China is determined to control the world's technology and commerce. Gary Lane brings us details.
Within hours of invading Ukraine, Vladimir Putin made an urgent phone call to Beijing. He wanted to discuss his actions with Chinese President Xi Jinping. Not only did Xi know about the invasion in advance, Western intelligence officials say the Chinese requested Putin delay military action until after the Beijing Olympics. Russia obliged. This revelation indicates a strengthening of the Sino-Russian alliance and suggests the potential for President Xi to rely on his Russian partner for additional help. So is he preparing to pounce on Taiwan?
Certainly, he's watching what happens in Ukraine and certainly how the rest of the world reacts to it. I think Putin went to China in order to get Xi's blessing for the invasion.
And perhaps a nod toward closer cooperation. Both presidents know Russian success in Ukraine is necessary for the alliance to make more significant gains.
Russia the bear and China the dragon are looking at a way to undermine the United States on the edges of their spheres of influence. If the Russians extend their area of hegemonic influence over Eastern Europe, China backs it. The Chinese will look towards the Russians for support for a potential invasion of Taiwan, an expansion of their hegemonic interests towards Southeast Asia.
Greg Roman is director of the Middle East Forum.
Both countries, I think wrongly, but they both feel threatened by the U.S. dominance in the region, and now they're pushing back. If they work together, they're more likely to think that they'll succeed. But I think the U.S., by the time it starts confronting these two theaters, should wake up and realize that it's time to contain Russia and China. And at the end of the day, the Russians and the Chinese have a historical grievance that goes back hundreds of years, and that might upset the apple cart.
For now, in order to aid their pursuit for Russian energy and Chinese money, certain countries are joining this new Sino-Russian-led axis. That includes Pakistan, whose Prime Minister Imran Khan met with Putin just hours before the Ukraine invasion, even though war was imminent. His high-level Moscow visit was Pakistan's first of its kind in more than 20 years. Hudson Institute senior fellow Robert Spalding suggests why timing of this convergence is troubling.
Ukraine plus Russia plus China plus China's Belt and Road Initiative, so all the satellite states, to include countries like Iran and North Korea and others that are along the Belt and Road Initiative, makes them incredibly powerful, not just militarily, not just from a nuclear weapon perspective, but also economically, financially, and increasingly technologically.
American ally Taiwan would be a rich target. It has plenty of wealth and technology, currently accounting for 60% of the world's semiconductor revenue. A coordinated military invasion of the island would give the members of this alliance dominance over the global microchip industry. That could prove devastating to the U.S. defense industry, which relies heavily on its allies' tech.
Taiwan Semiconductor is the best chip manufacturer in the world today. It's no longer American companies. It is TSMC. Now, the good news is they've started to build a fab in Arizona. So, part of what we would be doing in the response to a potential invasion by China would be relocating the engineers and scientists that work on chips, and as many of the people of Taiwan that would like to, leave before the invasion begins.
Concerns over this anti-American axis extend far beyond Taiwan and advanced Chinese military capabilities. North Korea, a longtime member, continues to threaten its neighbors with missile launches, and Iran may soon possess a nuclear weapon. Technology experts also warn that China's advances in artificial intelligence already exceed those of the United States.
It's really a fundamentally different world, and the tragedy of it all is that we helped them build it.
And we're not doing a lot to advance our own, are we?
This has been growing. We knew it was happening. We wanted to hope or wish it away, kind of like Chamberlain and others of his ilk during World War II.
And the Ukrainian pushback against the Russians may be the wake-up call needed to spur the United States and its allies to respond resolutely to this new and dangerous axis of evil threat. Gary Lane, CBN News.
Thanks, Gary. Still ahead, batter up. Major League Baseball and Players Union strike a deal. Next. Finally tonight, baseball is back. Major League Baseball and the MLB Players Association reached a deal Thursday afternoon after an extended 99-day lockout. Players and fans alike are excited to get back to the diamond, and a return to the business of baseball means trades and signings can be made once again. Spring training camps are right around the corner, and with more than 200 unsigned players, there's a chance for a flurry of moves in the coming hours. The full 162-game season will begin on April 7th. So some good news there to end on this Friday. That's going to do it for Faith Nation. From all of us here, have a great weekend and God bless you.